I'm here to introduce the speaker today, is Tyson Elliott, and is currently the Human Trafficking Director for the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice. And prior to accepting this position, Tyson was the statewide Human Trafficking Coordinator for the Florida Department of Children and Families. He was a detective with the Alachua County Sheriff's Office in Gainesville, Florida, and the Osceola County Sheriff's Office in Kissimmee, Florida. He has investigated all types of human trafficking and recovered both foreign and domestic victims. Tyson has worked with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement on several occasions to revise the human trafficking curriculum for law enforcement and has spoken at several conferences throughout the country on human trafficking. And I have personally visited with him for a few minutes, and he has a wealth of knowledge, so I think you'll get a lot out of the conversation today. So welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I was told to remind the people watching online to receive a training certificate. You're going to have to log in and out of each individual session throughout the day, and then watch the entire session in order to get your training certificate. And then also please participate in survey that will follow. All right, well, it's almost lunchtime now. So the Commissioner already kind of introduced me. I'm Tyson Elliott with the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice. I'm the Human Trafficking Director there. And I personally put together this panel because I worked with these individuals from Broward County on a regular basis while here at the Department of Juvenile Justice and at the Department of Children and Families. And I thought that they do an outstanding job of illustrating to you guys how they work interagency, how they collaborate on identification, sharing information, investigating cases, and ultimately serving the victims. So that's one of the reasons why we want to put together this panel, so they can talk about how they go about their business. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves individually briefly. We're going to start with Tabitha.
Good morning. My name is Tabitha Bush. I am the report specialist with the Department of Juvenile Justice. I am also a part of the Broward Human Trafficking Coalition and subcommittee STARS. And STARS stands for Stop Trafficking and Rescue Survivors. And that subcommittee focuses on youth who are under the age of 18 years old in the community as well as in foster care.
Hi, my name is Sarah Cummings, and I work with Broward Sheriff's Office at the Juvenile Assessment Center. I run the team called the Juvenile Assessment Team, who does substance abuse and mental health assessments with kids when they get arrested and they come to the Juvenile Assessment Center. If they show risk on their initial screening tool, then we do a full battery mental health and substance abuse assessment, as well as a psychosocial evaluation. How I became involved is through the affiliation with Broward Human Trafficking Coalition. We started asking questions within our psychosocial evaluation to start identifying youth that come to the JAC for risk or current victimization of domestic violence sex trafficking.
Good morning, folks. How you doing? Wake up. Hi, I'm Sergeant Debbie Bjorndal. I'm a sergeant with the Broward County Sheriff's Office. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for 26 years and been in law enforcement for 35 years. Currently, I'm assigned to the Child Protective Investigation. Broward Sheriff's Office is one of the 6 sheriff's offices in the county, or I should say in the state, that handles child protective investigations on the dependency side and with coordination with TCF. Currently, right now, I am overseeing all the dependency human trafficking cases coming into our division. I know it states in the book that I'm seeing everything. I don't. Sergeant Joe Weller and Sergeant Ross oversees the criminal aspect of the human trafficking and also the ICAD, the Internet Crimes Against Children, and they're in the Strategic Intelligence Division.
All right. So why don't you tell the audience, the participants here, how do the different individual agencies come together for these multidisciplinary team staffing?
Well, I'd like to see a show of hands. How many law enforcement do I have in the room? Just a show of hands. How many people from DJJ and JAP? How many service providers? And how many citizens of Florida? All right. Okay, before May 14th of 2011, human trafficking did not exist in Broward County. You all believe that, right? May 14, 2011, our South Florida Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force and the FBI Minor Vice Task Force conducted a raid operation in Oak Park. That raid operation was on a residential home. Totally residential, middle class. This was not down in Miami Beach. This was in a residential home. After a search warrant was implemented in that home, 8 children were recovered. There was 15 males in that house, and they were having the girls perform sexual acts and dances for them. At that point in time, 6 cases were called to the abuse hotline. Since 2009, DCF has had the maltreatment and human trafficking, but because the law was not encompassing non-caregivers with these pimps, nothing much was being done on it. So when these 6 cases came in, at that point in time, nobody knew what to do with them. The PIs had no training. They did not know how to understand the indicators of what was coming with these girls. These girls were considered ungovernable teens. They were runaways. They were throwaways. They were foster children. So we had to collaborate together to figure out how we're going to sit here and solve a problem that we know we've been ignoring for a very long time. So what we do is, for our Sheriff's Office, with our substance abuse children and our child, we partner with our service providers within the county. And at that point in time, we got hold of Crystal's Health, who handled our child, and says, listen, we need to cooperate together with a multidisciplinary staffing with all the providers to deal with these children that have been victimized in human trafficking. And that's how we came about. Also, too, at the same time, we had to do training. We got with Christie House and Crystal's Health, and we had to train every one of the investigators to have them understand what are the indicators, what are the triggers to identify a child that is a victim of human trafficking. At that point in time, Kristen, who is not here today, she's overseeing another panel, she took the Share Whole project and she redeveloped a staffing form for us in a narrative form. It was gender responsive programming, because male and females respond different to services. Service providers know that's correct, right? So we had to be sexual specific on the training and how we're going to sit here and answer questions. So this is how this all came about. We were all scattered all over Broward County, and with one incident, we had to bring everybody together, and that's how we're getting together today. One incident in one person's county triggered an entire community to work together.
Prior to the occurrence of the Boom Boom Room, Sergeant B and I, both work for Broward Sheriff's Office, and we'd speak to each other regarding abuse cases, but we were not speaking to each other necessarily regarding the kids that were being identified. We were calling it an abuse hotline, but there wasn't necessarily an entire staff going around to be able to wrap our arms around these kids and make sure we provide them services.
Also, with the Department of Juvenile Justice, we started a pilot project in 2011, where if the youth was, had a history of chronic runaways and they were going to be processed through our juvenile assessment center, then Sarah would also contact me to indicate to me that the youth was screened. There was an assessment that was completed, and at that point, the Department of Juvenile Justice would begin to identify the youth who were. Sorry, can you guys hear me? Okay. Do I need to talk a little bit louder?
Yes.
Please.
A lot louder.
All right. And at that time, the Department of Juvenile Justice was being notified that the youth was identified as a human trafficking victim.
If I could just briefly, before we go to the next slide, just let you know, you can see what the objective today. The objective today is to basically speak about what we do in Broward as far as making sure we get the kids the services they need, using a multidisciplinary approach, and hopefully you'll be able to mimic that process with all parties coming together in your own district. And also talk about how the multidisciplinary process used in Broward meets some of the criteria set forth in the Safe Harbor Act.
So as many of you know that are in the child world, the child abuse world, juvenile justice world, there are many different components to the multidisciplinary team. So could the panelists tell us when you have your staffings, who typically attends your staffings?
In July of 2012, we actually started our staffings, our multidisciplinary staffings in January. Our first staffing was February of 2012. In July of 2012, because of funding, we lost Chrysalis, but they still remain partners with us. We needed to reach out to all our mental health partners. We needed to reach out to DJJ. We needed to reach out to our JAC centers. We needed to reach out to our law enforcement, our attorneys, our GALs. All of us come together on a monthly basis to sit here and find out what we can do to provide services for the child that's been victimized by these perps. There's two issues here. I know you all understand about broken windows. You can sit here and you can arrest somebody and you can put that person in jail. But who's going to help fix the child that's been victimized year after years after years? And that is what this team does. The team looks at this child's victimization as far as back when the child was 5 years old, or maybe when that child was born and that child went into foster care. The team then turns around and we analyze every little abuse that happens to this child, what type of trauma that this child has suffered. So we can sit here and decide what is the best services. And we all sit here and we cooperate together. What are we going to do to help this child out? Because this child is not a piece of trash. This is a human being that's been victimized, been sold, and does not have any self-worth. And we're trying to give that child back their soul. Our process is developed and redeveloped all through the year. We're always changing. We're always coming up with different ideas. When we gave the investigators the staffing form to fill out, they did not know how to fill it out. So what we did is we revised the staffing forms into a multiple choice questions. So when they went in there, we could put the different choices of what the kids were arrested for, what the mental health issues the kids have, what type of drug usage, do the kids have cell phones or what. We're looking for all these indicators to identify a child that's been groomed or is being a victim of human trafficking.
And the questions that we ask when the kids come through, at least half the kids, probably about 60% of the kids that have been identified in Broward have been identified through the Juvenile Assessment Center with the Juvenile Assessment Team. So what we bring to the table is we ask questions specifically regarding the kids' mental health and substance abuse needs, if they have any, as well as past trauma. But we also ask questions regarding their relationships, and we get some information regarding the trafficker, him or herself as well. And then we're able to share all that information at the table when we come to the multidisciplinary staffings, so we have a really good idea of what mental health and substance abuse needs the youth has, as well as past trauma, and we're able to help law enforcement with any information we're able to garner from the youth regarding their suspected trafficker.
The information that the Department of Juvenile Justice brings to the table is the youth delinquent history, their history of any services that they've had in the past or current services, any obstacles that we may be having for them to comply with the sanctions of their probation, the location of the youth, if the youth is on abscond status, or if the youth has any violations of probation. So we basically just tie in the delinquency part of the case.
Sarge, you mentioned the staffing form. Is that a form that you guys came up with on your own that's specific to human trafficking?
When we asked Kristen to help out with the staffing form, she looked at the Share Home Project, and also we went to the Department of Homeland Security, and we identified what are the common indicators of a victim of human trafficking. So we took the best form we have. Now our form addresses human trafficking and domestic minor sex trafficking. We do have children that, especially we've been having a lot of children coming through Guatemala, through Mexico, and being shipped over here. Our primary, 99% of our cases are domestic cases. We'll have one or two, but in our staffing form, we utilize the Department of Homeland Security questions to identify a victim foreign victim of human trafficking. And we put these all together. We have added questions on, we've taken stuff off, we fine-tune it, we'll fine-tune it again. Our staffing form is posted on the South Center for Child Welfare under Circuit 17. If anybody wants to take a look at it, I can help you find the webpage. But we openly post our staffing form there to help anybody out. Palm Beach County uses our staffing form. Orange County uses it. So we're sitting here and developing the best tool to sit here and identify these kids. Also, this tool is a living tool. It goes into a database, and when these kids come back, and they can pick up again. We see what services we have placed with each child 6 months ago, a year ago, and we see what we need to fine tune in this. So it's not like if I'm not here or Sarah or Tabitha, we know exactly what we did 6 or 7 months ago on these children. So that service provider, because this didn't work this time, we need to find out what's going to happen.
Also, you also, with the staffing form, it coordinates with the Florida Safe Harbor Act. So a lot of the information is being derived from the Florida Safe Harbor Act.
You mentioned that you introduced yourself that the Broward Sheriff's Office employs the DCF, Sheriff's investigators. They might not be clear. We keep saying we are using the staffing form. They might have been detectives or something.
No, actually, the staffing form is shared with the detectives. The staffing form is the child protective investigators are doing these staffings because these cases are coming in through the abuse hotline or they're being called in, from the FBI. So this staffing form is used by child protective investigators. Any pertinent information that law enforcement needs, they come and they look at the staffing form because they are now taking intelligence information off that staffing form to arrest, a perpetrator that's been preying on kids. We'll find when we're staffing these cases that we'll be discussing tattoos. And next thing you know, we'll be discussing another girl's tattoo. The tattoos are related. So now we know the perps are related. So what's happening is we look at different things that are related between the girls because we might have 4 or 5 girls tied up with the same pimp. And I hate using the word pimp because the children do not use the word pimp. It's daddies, boyfriends, uncles, friends. We don't even use the word pimp with the children because they just do not see themselves as pimp. I mean, a lot of us were here in the 70s and 80s and remember that Hollywood glorified pimps. I remember the movies and everything else. These are not glorified people. These are people that are sitting here preying on our children. So these staffing forms are created by child protective investigators. They're reviewed by the service providers in Broward County, and anything that we can share with law enforcement on the criminal side, that is shared.
Can you tell the audience how each of your own individual agencies, how you communicate with each other or working on suspected CSES cases?
I'm going to start here just because I did mention at the Juvenile Assessment Center that we identified about 60% of the kids in Broward that were called from the hotline. So when we do, we actually ask a series of questions through a pilot project, which we'll elaborate on later. But we ask a series of questions that help us identify kids that are high risk for being trafficked or maybe that are currently being trafficked. So as soon as we see some of the risk, or we speak to the guardian may report risk, we make a call into the hotline. As soon as we make the call into the hotline, we actually notify Child Protective Investigations via Sergeant B and also Department of Juvenile Justice via Tabitha, and we let them know that we made the abuse call to the hotline and what the circumstances were, what the risk factors were that facilitated us to make the call. So we share that information, and that a lot of times that call to the abuse line is what triggers the multidisciplinary process and the full-blown investigation into to be able to verify the youth as a victim or not, as a victim of domestic minor sex trafficking or sexual exploitation.
Monthly, especially with our foster children, the Department of Children and Families puts out a missing persons list. We share that with law enforcement because we know when these kids run away from the foster homes that they're going to be preyed on for human trafficking or domestic minor sex trafficking. So when law enforcement completes or runs their stings on a weekly, monthly basis, they are actually looking for these kids because we need to find the children. Because they are being shipped around the country. They're being shipped around to different counties, and we're sitting here and we need to get them out of this world. So we're keeping track of our children. Same thing too with our missing community kids. Our criminal investigation unit sits there and identifies, is this child going to be a victim that's going to be preyed on for human trafficking? We share information back and forth with each other from our group homes. We'll get a phone call from Chrysalis Center or one of our centers together, and what's happening is we might have children that are in a hotel room. And these are runaway kids. They'll go to the group home, they'll go to the hotel, they'll come back to the group home. So we sit here, we identify which hotels the kids are frequently, and we're letting law enforcement know so they can set up their stings on this. So we have to communicate. The biggest thing we're trying to get across here, guys, is we are all working together as a team. Not one entity can handle all this information. We have to share the information. We have to share the information we're finding out from the kids. We have to share the information we're finding out from the streets, from different law enforcement agencies, and from the child protection unit. So we're working as a team. Providers find out from the kids through services that, hey, listen, I just got beat up by this guy. He's over at Quintian, and I'm not putting any any down, but we have a lot of these kids going to the same place, and we have to share the information back and forth.
One way the Department of Juvenile Justice communicates is that we created an alert system. In the alert system, basically, we enter an alert of endangered person, and it allows us to enter a comment. The comment basically says that this child has been identified or is a verified victim of human trafficking. So if the child is on abscond status, if the child is on abscond status and they're apprehended by law enforcement or the FBI, when they run the child's name in our system, our juvenile justice system, if that alert automatically comes up and it gives them the indication that the child needs to be taken to the juvenile assessment center, or they will contact me, or they will contact contact Sergeant B with the child protective investigations.
And one of the reasons that the alert is so important is because if the youth is identified as a endangered person or possibly being trafficked, it also makes sure that when that child is either released from the juvenile assessment center or from the juvenile detention center, that child is not released to their trafficker. Because the child can be released with guardian permission, can be released to any responsible adult that, as you know, doesn't have a criminal record once a background check is completed. So it's very important that counties do not actually release the young person to their trafficker when they're either being released from the juvenile assessment center or from the juvenile detention center. It also allows, once that youth is picked up, or he or she is returned for a runaway, and they come back into the assessment center, that we can wrap our arms around them quickly and get them re-engaged in services. So the kids are just not released and forgotten about once the staffing period is over.
And it's very important when the kids are picked up through DJJ, like in our morning session, these kids are not being arrested for prostitution. These kids are being arrested for battery. They're being arrested for disruption of the school function, assaults, minor drug trafficking, shoplifting. You have children that are acting out and getting arrested for crimes, but not the crime that's being perpetrated on them. So at the JAC, when we have these kids for the 21-day period, and it's the reason why we communicate with each other, is at that point in time, we engage in services. We know we have these kids for 21 days. We know we can get a provider with those kids for 21 days to see if we can stop this. It doesn't always work, but we keep trying, and that's one thing we can do is keep trying.
Right. So, you answer me? Okay. So, can you tell us what are the goals of the staffing and of the multidisciplinary team staffing, and how does it relate to the Safe Harbor Act that passed last year?
2012, a lot of research went into the staffing formula, like I stated. 2012, we sat and monitored legislation and how the Safe Harbor Act was going to come about. The Safe Harbor Act identified children that were runaways. There's a great study done by Houston Police Department where they took all their children that were on runaway, and they interviewed these children, and they found most of these children were all sexually assaulted. You can actually go online to see the study. But these children, some of them were throwaway kids. These children that do not trust, their peers. They do not trust law enforcement. They don't trust their mom and dad. These are children that are being manipulated by the trafficker. They're beginning drugs. They become addicted to the drugs. So what happened is on the staffing form, or we took the staffing form, we took it directly out of state statute. State statute says that we need to address all these issues here. We need to address the child's mental health. We need to address the child's substance abuse. We need to protect the child. What are the risks we're going to identify with this child? What are we going to do with the child's mental health history? So that's how we redeveloped our staffing form in January 2013.
There's basically two concurring goals of the staffing itself. One being having a trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed response and ensuring that the youth get all the services that he or she needs. And the second goal is to be able to help law enforcement with any identifiers that the youth may provide as far as their trafficker, so that we can work toward making sure that traffickers pay legally for exploiting these young people.
Another thing you want to keep in mind is that the goal of the staffing is also trying to reunite the family. A lot of times we focus more on the child and not the family. We need to make sure that we are educating our families if their child is, experiencing or have been identified as a human trafficking victim. Because a lot of times our families don't know that their children are being exposed to this type of situation. So if we do come across a case where the family is not engaged or the family is just not willing to assist, then we try to find ways to integrate services for the entire family and not just the child itself.
Up in the projector slide here, these are our questions that we answer during the staffing. We identify if we've had previously staffed this child before, because sometimes we staff a child 2 or 3 times a year because they continue to become victimized. We have to find out what is the mental health issues of this child, because the provider that we place with this child is going to sit there and address that mental health issues. If the child's on medication, what type of counseling will give this child? This child health care. A lot of these kids have STDs. We have to get over Department of Health. We have to address this. If there's any pregnancy, if there's substance abuse, all these are interrelated together. What educational opportunities are we going to give these kids? These kids, most of these children are very, very smart children. They enjoy going to school. They go to school because it's a safe place. It's a very safe place. These kids are not dumb kids, but they start skipping school. They start, dropping out of school because now they're in the trafficker's world. We need to do a safe environment. So we sit here and we address every one of these questions, what we're going to do for this child. And like I said, this is a living document. It goes into a database system. So when we have the child again, we re-look at it. Sometimes our children, when we staff, they're runaways. So we take our recommendations, and when this child is recovered, we go immediately to the recommendations so we put them in place for this child.
And with the recommendations, it's also, because we have many players at the table like you saw on the previous slide. So when we make recommendations for the youth, we also we make the recommendation, but then we also identify who is responsible for following through with that recommendation. So we don't just walk away from the table and say, yes, the child needs substance abuse counseling, and yes, the child needs a trauma-informed response specific to sexualized behaviors and past sexual abuse, but we also discuss who's responsible for linking that youth to that service and who's responsible for providing that service so we can ensure the follow-through.
All right, I'm going to skip down to 6. Just a little behind time. Just as a reminder, also you have question cards that were in your chair. Feel free to start filling those out as we go along. If you have a question about something, give them to one of the volunteers, and then we'll address whatever questions you guys have. So can you guys tell us about how many youths have you staffed today and any of the findings from those staffings?
Broward Sheriff's Office Child Protection Unit, since January of 2012, 194 cases were called into the abuse hotline. Out of those 194 cases, 22 children were picked up that were out-of-state children. These were confirmed children that were being trafficked for sex, and these children were returned back to their state. We performed 119 to date multidisciplinary staffings. Out of that 119 staffings, 11 of those were repeat victimizations. So in other words, we had 11 children that kept on getting themselves involved in this world. As indicated in the Safe Harbor Act, the sexually exploited children need special care and services in the dependency process, including counseling, health care, substance abuse treatment, educational opportunities, and a safe environment secured from the trafficker. Identifying the high-risk indicators of the substance misuse, delinquent history, mental health history, prior physical and sexual abuse history, all this plays in what we're doing with these kids on the 119 kids we staffed. In conjunction to the 119 children that we identified, the Forward Abuse Hotline, the ICAD unit received 234 tips of additional children that are being trafficked. So, like I said, when I asked you guys back in 2011, did human trafficking exist in Broward County? No. Now you suddenly go from 119 cases called in the abuse hotline to 234, and that's because of the awareness of the public. The public's being aware, and our numbers are going to go up. If they're going to go up, because we want to identify these victims, and then our law enforcement partners out there, they have the task force, are going to sit there and find the perpetrators so our numbers can come back down. But this is why we're getting together as a group to sit here, because we know we're going to hit a peak, but we're going to bring it back down.
I'm just going to skip a little bit ahead because I know we're a little bit behind. But what I wanted to talk about too, as far as identifying victims, and Tyson asks this question frequently, is that, and there's going to be another panel discussion later talking about indicators. But out of the 43 youth that were identified in 2013, 43 of those kids were identified through the Juvenile Assessment Center, and only 3 of those kids had sexual-related charges. The other kids did come out on masking charges. So as far as being able to identify kids and making sure the kids get staffed, I would urge any assessment center and even any treatment provider to start garnering what they need to look for when they're doing intakes and assessment on the kids, to make sure that they are identifying the kids and calling them into the hotline. And we'll talk a little bit about how you do that at the end.
Tyson, can you go to the next slide? The reason why we keep the stats, and we keep the stats on every one of our staffings, is because my service providers, we need to know how we can direct the best services for the kids. As you can see, out of those kids, 84% of these children have delinquent history. These kids are acting out, and they're acting out by doing the shoplifting, they're acting out by getting into fights. You can see the alcohol use. It's 90% alcohol and drug use. 91% of our children have mental health issues. These are the kids that are out in the street, and that's why they're being preyed on. And look at this, 94% of these kids have prior sexual or physical abuse. You're taking a child that's very vulnerable, and your child is going into it. We have children as young as 8 years old as being prostituted because they don't have a family that is a family group. They're in foster care, and these guys know this. They sit here and they prey on the group homes. They know these children have this problems that they have to deal with, and they know that they can sit there and buy the kids a nice hairdo, the nails, the purse, the cell phones, because they're going to buy these kids and get them caught in the world. So we look at the stats, we keep the stats on our kids, so we can sit here and provide the best services we can to get them out of this world.
I think Sarah made an excellent point there. In my travels around for DJJ, when I go to different task force meetings or I'm speaking someplace, a lot of people in the community, when they hear human trafficking, they have a couple of myths that kind of come up, and one of those is, well, we don't have human trafficking or we don't have sex trafficking around here because there's no kids being arrested for prostitution, i.e. we have no sex trafficking and we have no human trafficking. And they try to make that correlation, and Sarah made a good point there with those numbers, that the overwhelming majority of the kids that
come into our care at the Department of Juvenile Justice are not coming in on a prostitution charge. So if we're sitting back as a community waiting for that, we're missing out on a vast majority of the children. Sarah, can you talk a little bit about the pilot project at the Jack in Broward County, how that started, and how that led to some of the numbers that you have now?
Yes. Like I said, because of our involvement with the Broward Human Trafficking Coalition, we added questions within our psychosocial evaluation to start identifying youth that may be victims. Because we were already identifying victims, really thanks to Tyson for letting Secretary Walter know that we were already identifying victims, we were charged or requested that we actually be the initiation site for a DJJ pilot project to basically enhance the identification of victims. So rather than just adding some, asking the questions that we asked within our psychosocial evaluation, we also, with permission from Shared Hope International, we even with some training from Shared Hope International, we used the tool that they used, but we edited it just a little bit because the tool that they used was just for females and it was just for youth with heterosexual orientation. It didn't meet the, it didn't really ask questions that were specific and took consideration for our GLBTQ youth. So we added the Shared Hope International tool. We started using it with every child that when they came through the JAC and they reported on the packed pre-screen that they had a history of runaway or they'd been kicked out of their house or thrown out of their house. So every kid that had a runaway, throwaway, kicked out of the house history, we would do the Shared Hope International intervene tool with that youth. And that's how we started identifying kids for the Juvenile Assessment Center. And as soon as we identify those kids and we call the abuse call, we make the abuse call, that's where Tabitha comes in and she takes the process further with the Department of Juvenile Justice.
Once I get the information from Sarah indicating that an abuse report was made, at that particular time I would contact the assigned juvenile probation officer and have a brief staffing with the juvenile probation officer to inform them what the next process is. And basically what the next process is that I kind of get information from them on what's going on as far as their probation, what's going on in the home, does the child have a severe history of runaway, and then when it's time for the MAT staffing, I will be able to deliver all of that information for the MAT staffing so that we can come with a collaborative treatment for the child. And this is, as you can look on the screen, this is our survivor protocol. I kind of like read it before it actually came out, but this ties into when I enter the alerts for the youth who have been identified or verified as a human trafficking victim. As I mentioned earlier, as a liaison, I attend the MAT staffings and work closely with the assigned JPO. And if the child is sheltered as a dependent child at that time, I work very closely with the assigned DCF worker.
And one thing I wanted to say, it also goes full circle. I don't want you to leave the impression or be left with the impression that we actually wait for the staffing to occur in order to get the youth services. So as soon as we identify the youth and we make the call to the abuse hotline, Tabitha and I and Sergeant B and Kristen, who was another panel member that had to facilitate a different panel, we all get together with other parties that are involved in that staffing and make sure that we get the kids, try to connect the kids to the services immediately. We don't wait for the staffing. So hopefully by the time the staffing rolls around, as long as the youth is not on the run, then we're able to have already engaged that youth in services, and the MAT staffing, we can report that, but also enhance the services currently to them. And the whole pilot project goes full circle because like other counties, not every juvenile that gets arrested comes from the Juvenile Assessment Center. Broward is a very large area, and so not every kid comes through the Juvenile Assessment Center. So on the other end, Tabitha, if the juvenile probation officer suspects that the youth may be trafficked or the guardian has given them reason to believe that the youth may be trafficked, the kid can come back to the Juvenile Assessment Center and we can complete the Sheriff Hope International Tool Review. So sometimes we come on the other loop too, where Tabitha can call me and ask me if we can assess a specific youth that is involved in the delinquency system. And then if they do show indicators, of course, then we start that whole process and make sure the kid gets the staffing.
We're skipping number 8. Can you guys talk about some barriers that you faced trying to identify, work with, help provide for these children?
I'm going to start, and then everyone else can jump in. And I'm going to go quickly because I can see we're short on time. But with Safe Harbor, we don't necessarily have secure shelter in Broward. There are some areas that do have secure shelter. We're just not one of the lucky ones right now that do. So when we have a kid that is identified and that young person is a frequent runner or absconds, we really don't have a safe place to maintain that child. So our greatest barrier is the child being present in order to get the services. In addition to that, we have group homes that sometimes are unable to manage the youth's behavior because they can be aggressive because of the past trauma they've incurred, and because being in a trafficking situation where they have all that freedom and then be expected to follow all the rules of the group home, the kids are not always capable of that. And in addition to that, sometimes the group homes are actually in the metropolitan area where the kids are being trafficked, so they have very, very easy access to return to their life.
And one of the major gaps that we're seeing in 2012, a greater percentage of our cases involve foster kids. This year has been flip-flop. Our major kids are community kids. These are kids who are living right next door to you. The foster children, they always run back to the foster home, so we happen to give them the services. But we're lacking services for the community kids. We're lacking the education. We need to get into the schools. We need to warn these children about these boyfriends, because they sit here and they are very glamorous, to get to calm the kids in there, and they get them into a world that they can't get out. So and another barrier is we're having our kids, our 14-year-old kids, recruiting other children. And they're recruiting the kids out of force. The kids don't have any money. Hey, listen, no problem. I'll get you a brand new hairdo today. I'll get your nails done. Why don't you come with me? So that is a big barrier. Other children recruiting other children. Because you have to remember, the trafficker doesn't want to get caught. He doesn't care about that 14-year-old child that might go to jail, for recruiting another child. So we have to sit here and understand that these kids are preying on themselves. It's just not the trafficker out there. And we need more residential mental health placement for these trauma-exposed children.
I hear a lot of people say around the state that there's no way that this particular child could be a human trafficking victim because they're living at home with mom and dad and they're going to school every day. How accurate is that rumor or that statement?
All of us were 16 and 17 years old at one time. Do you remember when you argued with your mom and dad because you didn't want your mom and dad to tell you what to do? But these are the kids that these guys are going after. Because what's happening is the kids sit there and can run away because they get into an argument with mom and dad, and now the guys are going to sit there and prey on the kids. I had a child that was 14 years old. She was taken to the Hard Rock Casino. This child came from a very nice family. This child had a very nice room, and mom and dad could not believe that she was being groomed for human trafficking. But this girl was given, and this girl had everything she wanted, but this trafficker was giving her even more. So our community kids are being preyed on because they're taking vulnerability of the children because of us growing up as teenagers. We don't want to listen to mom and dad. Let's sit here. Let's go into another exciting world here. And we have more community kids this year that we're looking at. But what can we do to sit here and warn these children, educationally wise, and with service announcements? Hey, listen, this is not what you want to get yourself into. Yeah, I know you want the new cell phone out there, the new iPhone out there, but listen, this is not why you want to do it for sex. So it's not a rumor, it's true. Community kids are being targeted for trafficking because you know why? It's a monetary gain for the trafficker. It's all about money. Drugs are all about money. Weapons are all about money. It's money. These kids are seen as a commodity. They're not seen as human beings.
Sarah, what is the significance of the tattoos? What are the girls studying when they come to the assessment center and they have a tattoo from them for a trafficker?
Well, sometimes the young people are forthcoming and sometimes they're not. But the significance of tattoos is they can trigger us to believe that possibly the youth is being trafficked. Especially if a tattoo involves hearts and stars and a money sign together, that can be definitely a signal that she's being trafficked. Or if she has a name on her arm, for example, one young lady, she had the name Ricky on her arm, and she told me that it was a cousin, but when come to speak to her father, there's no cousin named Ricky. So then that gave us a big indicator that was actually her trafficker. So the tattoos, not that every kid that's trafficked has a tattoo, not necessarily. That's not a number one finding. They have to have a tattoo in order to be a trafficking victim. But certainly, if you look at the tattoos and you ask about tattoos that even possibly you can't see, and you ask about what they are and what they mean to you, that can clue you into the fact that the youth could be a trafficking victim.
This is for anybody. How can NGOs in the community, how can they partner with DCF or DJJ to make sure at-risk kids don't go back into trafficking or possibly slip through the cracks?
Actually, right now, our NGOs are partnering with our community-based provider. We're having foster parents come in, and they're spending, and these are women that are spending time with the children on a social basis, playing cards, Scrabble, art, sewing. They are sitting here and making a communication with the kids. Plus, what we're doing is we're training specialized foster homes to have the kids go into and get them out of the group homes. So the NGOs have been very proactive in Broward County. They've been holding meetings. They make training sessions. They do community announcements. So we have a very positive relation with the NGOs, and also too, they're their eyes for our community. They sit there and they look for the children that are walking the street so they can call law enforcement up in order to identify, hey, listen, I think this girl is going to get herself in trouble here with this 35-year-old man, this 6-year-old man here. So we just send out law enforcement out there right away, because you figure you take every church in Broward County and you sit there and that's another eye. That church is now protecting that. Those church members are protecting those children because they are now that family. They're an entire family in Broward County.
Based on that, on the pilot that you did, and maybe start to be from your experience, could you give ballpark numbers on some of the demographics, like about the age that the kids are when they're coming through, maybe their race, anything at all?
Actually, like I said, the youngest child that we had was 8 years old. Our average age is 14 to 16 years. Race, there's no issue with race here because they're not looking for, they're just looking for girls. We do have boys. We do have boys, but also too, like in sex crimes, boys are a little bit more reluctant to report that they've been sexually abused, even for trafficking. But age, what the trafficker is looking for is having a sex with a child, and they're selling that age of that child. So race doesn't play an issue with the age, and it's mainly female children.
Once the child is identified, and let's say they've already moved beyond an assessment center, or maybe being in one of our Department of Juvenile Justice detention centers, and they're back in the community, are they assigned some type of a child advocate, or is that the guardian ad litem's role? And then also, who follows up to ensure that whatever services are recommended, that those services are actually happening?
If the child is on probation, the assigned juvenile probation officer follows up with the services. If the child is assigned to a DCF worker, the DCF worker and the probation officer work together to follow up with services and to make sure that the child is attending the services. So also, if the child is in foster care and if they are assigned a guardian ad litem, then all three parties work together. So it just really basically depends on who has the case initially, because If the child is on probation, then the probation officer takes the lead in that particular case.
I think importantly, what a multidisciplinary team does is that, we can get caught into this is your kid because she or he has a delinquency case, or this is your kid because it's a foster care kid. But as a team, these kids are all our kids. So we really are responsible for tracking these kids and making sure we engage them in services, and when they return from runaway, we re-engage them in services.
And if the children are community children and they're not children of dependence and foster care, DJJ and Jack work with the parents. We work with the parents. Child Protection works with the parents. What can we do to help these parents provide the best needed services for these kids? We have to work as a team. We can't do this, individually. So that's the reason why we sit here and we might come up with the idea. Sarah might come up with the idea. But we sit here and we look, what can we do for this child that keeps running away? We keep putting this child back in that home. What does this child need? And each one of us, identifies probably, okay, this child needs grief counseling. She lost her mom 10 years ago. Never got the grief counseling. So we're looking at little entities to help this child out. But, like Sarah says, we have to work as a team to handle this.
What are some of the from Citizen, if a citizen was out there and they wanted to get involved, how could they get involved, or what are some of the biggest needs that you see? This is for anybody. Is it funding? Is it awareness? Do we need more juvenile probation officers, or law enforcement officers investigating? And what are some of the biggest needs? How can people get involved?
Money is always a problem. I mean, with the new law, the safe harbor law, for us having a lack of safe harbor shelters is obvious, can possibly be. The lack of money coming into our providers. Every time we have a budget cut, we lose providers. Money is like the biggest issue. The trafficker has all the money, and we just don't have the money. So we volunteer a lot of our time. A lot of our providers are NGOs. They volunteer their time because of the lack of money. And but we do need money to provide for the safe shelter of these kids, the services they need, the therapeutic services they need, activities. We've gone away for giving a place for children to hang out. So volunteering right now is the biggest asset we probably can do to protect our kids. But as a community, like I stated here, the community is the ones that are watching for the kids. Okay, remember, it takes a village to take care of a child. We cannot stop this unless the village goes up in arms. We need to all stick together. Fortunately, in Broward County in 2013, we have all these task forces that are being developed by the different cities. We have Fort Lauderdale Police Department that has a sergeant and 5 detectives now. We didn't have this in 2012. We have Hollywood PD, we have Pembroke Pines, we have our Strategic Intelligence Unit that's running the internet crimes against kids, and also human trafficking. So what's happening is law enforcement is getting grants, which is money, in order to fund enforcement. And we need more law enforcement agencies to put out the grants so we can sit here and prosecute and arrest these people so they don't prey on our children anymore. So money is a big issue therapeutically and with law enforcement. And we're always looking for those grants to sit there and fund our project.
And I think that any citizen, anyone in an NGO can attend the trafficking coalition within your district, because then you can hear specifically what your district and what the kids in your district need in order to try to keep them out of their life, and also to identify them early on. Because the earlier that you're able to identify the youth, the worse they are in life, the easier it is to keep them out of life. And if you go to those meetings, you spread the word, and you tell your neighbor what's going on, and make your neighbor aware of it, and you start to know what to look for, you'll be able to identify it, your neighbor will be able to identify it, and we'll be able to rescue these kids earlier than we are right now.
There were a couple of questions I'm going to just answer directly, and you guys feel free to chime in and correct me if I'm wrong. If a child is arrested, if a child is arrested for human trafficking, do they have the ability to have that arrest expunged And the answer is yes. There was a bill that passed last year for adults and children for any form of human trafficking if they are arrested for an offense during their victimization. There is a process now where they can go back to the court that has jurisdiction over that arrest and petition the court to have that arrest expunged. I don't know the exact statute number, and I'm assuming there's probably a few exceptions, probably like homicide and things like that. But that is now an option. There was also a question that said, when a child is identified as a victim of human trafficking, is there a program or a place they can choose to go instead of the detention centers? It's kind of a tricky question, but that was kind of the point behind the safe harbor law, was to give law enforcement the discretion, the opportunity to take that child to the Department of Children and Families as opposed to making an arrest. But as Sarah mentioned, the overwhelming majority are not coming in on prostitution charges, which is the obvious red flag. So if law enforcement picks up a gift of retail theft, it's maybe not reasonable that for law enforcement to suspect, hey, because this kid stole a Snickers bar, they're a victim of human trafficking. That's not usually a direct correlation that's made. So there is the ability to take them due to the safe harbor law to the Department of Children and Families, but the kid has to be identified on the front end. And as Sarah mentioned from the data, it's not something that's obvious more times than not. When you guys have some success stories, when you've collaborated, and you've worked on a case, and you've had a great success story, do you guys kind of proactively, do you put that in the media to raise awareness, to show that this is going on in your backyard? Is that information you get transmitted to the agency heads so they know that, hey, I had this problem, I have people working on it, I need to maybe devote more money and manpower to it? Is that kind of stuff happening?
Well, there's two success stories here. One we're doing on a law enforcement basis. We're going to go back to the boom boom room, and then Tabitha is going to do on the human side of it. The Open Park boom boom room was an organizer, which name was Jane Mosey, who was 34 years old. He was sentenced to life. This is handled under the federal investigation. One thing that is positive when we go federal with these children is we do have life sentences for people preying on the kids. And Tyson mentioned earlier about the kids not being picked up, but we sit here and when the children are being brought in and these stings, they are brought to a facility, by a community case provider. So we try to get them off the street. But this man here, he sat there. Everybody that was involved in that room went to jail. But I'm going to have Tabitha tell you a very good success story about one of the girls that came out of that room.
One of the young ladies that was involved in the room, she was actually the youngest victim. She was 14 years old. She was currently on probation, so I basically watched her grow up with the Department of Juvenile Justice. But at the time that the trial was going on, this young lady, she was on a scarn status for months. She went from Ohio to other different places. And when she finally arrived back to South Florida, I decided that I was going to take on this case on my own. And at that particular time, I had a conversation with the mom, which the mom had no idea that her child was being solicited because the child was living with with her father. So when I had a conversation with the mom and informed her of the different signs that her child was experiencing, of course it was very difficult for this mom to accept that her child was being solicited by someone that just randomly in the neighborhood. But to kind of make my story a little short, when I finally initially met with the child, and she was very, very angry. She was not accepting to anything that I was willing to offer her. But I assured her that, I was going to help her get out of this situation. So she decided to enroll in school, which was a very good thing because she was a very smart young lady. She decided to move back home with mom because her mom had a very strong relationship. And I also tried to get her to learn some independent living skills, but she was willing to do that. In the transition of that, her health began to deteriorate. And her mom called me and informed me that she was going to the emergency room. And of course, I was there at the emergency room with her to let the family know that I'm just not here from probation and to say that if you don't do what you need to do, you're going to be penalized for that. So I sat at the hospital with the family, and the child, she saw me, her face just lit up, and the first thing she said was, "You're the first person on the outside really genuinely showing me that you really care and not asking me for anything." At that time, when she recovered from her medical condition, she got a job. She decided that she wanted to get 2 jobs, but I was like, listen, we need to take baby steps. And her thing was, I need to make as much money as I possibly can. And then at that point, I knew that she was going backwards. And I was like, listen, sweetheart, 1 job at a time, school, job, home. It caused me to visit her at least 2 times a week because I didn't want her to move backwards. And then I finally decided, okay, now it's time for you to get off of probation because then you still have stipulations and you know your curfew and you can't enjoy your life as a teenager. So the judge agreed to terminate her probation. She was very excited, but even though she's not on probation today, she is still working. She is still getting her GED. She still calls me 2 times a week and asks me when am I coming out to see her. And I've taken a personal interest to go and visit her every now and then. But these children need to know that someone cares for them without asking for anything. And had I not been diligent and took off my DJJ hat, there's no telling where this child could have been. The mom is very grateful, even though they have that mother-daughter argument because she has to be home at a certain time. But at least her mom knows where she is. She's safe, and if she comes in contact with anyone that's going to cause her to revert back, she knows that she has me and her mom to depend on.